Harumph. Right, it's like, hello, good sir, and welcome. I would like to speak to you about the NeverNever, which is a term I really detest. I mean, I dislike it to a high degree. Wait a second. I like it on 8. It's just the volume of my microphone. Now, first of all, I just want to speak about it because at the moment I'm writing a book and this term really annoys me. And I think I just need some background information. And the only way that I can get that is by having a conversation with myself. And the only way to motivate me to have a conversation with myself is by recording it, which is just part of what I do. So first of all, the term NeverNever is just I hate it. And because I hate it, it's just I cannot grasp it. And of course we're talking about spirituality here, but we're also talking about feelings and emotions. Because you're a spiritual being, you're made up of energy. That's just basic knowledge, and anybody who denies that is deluded. That's just my concept of truth, and that's what I've discovered. That form is, changeable. And just because you think you are someone today doesn't mean you have to be that tomorrow. It's just hard to get there, if you know what I mean. So the NeverNever is, first of all, the term, I always mention that, is derived from Jim Butcher, or taken from, or adopted from the Harry Dresden books, the Dresden Files, which I have read, most of them, not all of them. I assume it may be time to just try to read his newest book. That's actually a nice idea. And to just also start to give in to the greed of, feeding myself things that I have not read before. And every time I try to read something that I've already read, I discover something new, but I also get kind of bored with it because you know already the whole story, right? And if it's about Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings, I mean, enough of that already. I'm just trying to look for new ways to understand what's happening, and I think it's actually a good way to just think about reading maybe the newest Harry Dresden book. So the NeverNever, from what I understand, is the underworld. Is when you reside here, you are in this realm of, certainty. There's a table and you hit the table and that's a table. But then there's also, because I've just been watching or started to watch Alice in Wonderland, and I have already read the book. And what that teaches me is, there is a world where things can just appear out of nowhere. But the thing is, if that would happen, I would probably go insane. Just imagine, that right now you're alone in your room and suddenly, somebody taps you on the shoulder and you turn around and then there's somebody standing. You would just shit your pants. But at the same time, I've had weird feelings about things. There were times where I felt like what I thought was real was just turning into some kind of uncertainty. And that was not always in connection with what we consider or call psychedelics. There used to be times where I took nothing and I still was uncertain. But psychedelics are certainly an amplifier. And so if we talk about the NeverNever, just the word in itself without clinging to the meaning that others have given to it, I know that every time it comes up, it just annoys me. And the reason it annoys me is because it's so hard to grasp. Because it doesn't really exist. I mean, let's just assume there's a different time in another dimension, and you can enter into this dimension, and then time runs faster or slower, and maybe your experiences will be much more intense. Just to quote Terence McKenna on this, if you don't take psychedelics, weird shit just isn't happening, and that's just a fact. And what he says is, it's not happening. So to him, it was clear that everything he discovered was real. It was just somewhere else. And he also said things like, I know the contents of my mind. And sometimes he would take psychedelics and he said, that's not in my mind. I mean, I cannot make that up, because where did it come from? Right? If you've never seen it, where, like in Language About the Unspeakable, he mentioned these waves that are just reading newspapers, and I start to see different things, especially when I walk at night through the forest, or sometimes when I sleep at night, or I wake up and suddenly I lay there and I'm awake and I'm buzzing. I literally feel like I'm buzzing. If I would go to science, they'd probably, try to connect me to wires, and then they'll just say I'm insane, or just I'm imagining it, because if you would sit there, it just wouldn't be real. And of course, if you would do that, then you would open yourself up to whatever is trying to convince you that you've lost it. Because if I check myself, I'm always there. I may lose perception of where I am, but if I know how to come back to myself, I don't want to say to my senses, because nothing makes sense, then okay, some things appear to make sense, but only until you understand also that they're actually nonsense. So people use all these words, right? I was earlier listening to the radio, and you can say, where does that come from? Waves being shot into whatever, and I can perceive it here. I mean, it's just weird. Of course, it's also propaganda, but whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just weird, What's propaganda? It's just propagating certain beliefs. And I was imagining how I would call the radio, and then I would hammer them with my spiritual truth. They'd just argue against it. And the question is why? Because I've certainly traveled into different dimensions where, I don't know, there were shifts in reality. I mean, I have witnessed things that anybody would say it was just a hallucination. But I mean, if I drink coffee, everything appears to be much faster. And I also work faster. If that's not a hallucination, then what is? I mean, the hallucination that we're manifesting this kind of weird hallucination of society. I mean, that's a hallucination, because what a hallucination is, to me, is just something that I dream up in my mind, and then I try to make it a reality. And, for some reason, this society is addicted to coffee. And the question is why? Well, there's a possibility that it's just a symptom of ignorance, that people just started drinking it and it made them feel a certain way, probably powerful, such as tobacco. And if you ever concern yourself with Carlos Castaneda and, what he talks about, what Don Juan said, according to these books, which to me certainly can be true, because nobody can just make up this amount of stuff. It certainly seems like he was going through a set of intense experiences, and then he just sat down and, just captured them into words, into writing. So whatever, Terence McKenna said about him, I can see this as real. I think Terence McKenna was just jealous or saw him as competition. And Terence McKenna was certainly a fan of also trying to see weird things so that he can have something to talk about. And sometimes I'm not sure when I listen to him if everything really happened, but I can imagine that it did. But it's just so weird. So the NeverNever to me is a place where it's like a bit like the spirit world with Avatar Aang, where he simply leaves his body behind and then just only travels in spirit. Because that's what happens if you take a psychedelic, but it also happened to me without taking anything. I just have some nights that are weird and I cannot explain why it's happening during that night. I cannot explain why I sometimes, it's not that I cry, but sometimes there just come tears out of my eyes, which some people may call crying. Like, why does it sometimes take so long for me to finally relax? Why does it sometimes take so long for me to get back on track, right? Sometimes I do something and it takes me an incredible amount of time to be up and running again. And there seems to be like I'm trying to get back to myself. So the question is, can my spirit travel into other dimensions and I kind of leave my body behind? Like, can, let's say, 70% of my spirit be somewhere else? And then the question is, what would it be doing and what would it encounter? Is sometimes I feel that's actually true. And then I would call that the NeverNever because it kind of doesn't exist. And I kind of, I just allow it to happen. And I'm just being pulled somewhere else. And sometimes I leave the house and I meet people and then I come back to my apartment and I certainly feel like whatever I encountered there is not real. This society is more like the underworld than anything I've ever seen in my dreams. My dreams seem more magical than, if I just walk around outside. If this is not hell, then I don't know what is. All these car fumes, it just smells terrible. There's also a reason why I choose to stay inside, because people are just crazy. Yesterday what happened, you just walk around on your own business and you are barefoot and somebody just comes and tries to talk you into having shoes. What is it to you? Yeah, sure, maybe I just blew her mind, but why do you touch my face? Sorry, but that's just, I'm sometimes not sure is what I'm saying. But what I learned is that, there's no benefit in demonizing anything. And neither is there a benefit to angelize anything. I think we sometimes have to acknowledge that there are people or beings that can hurt you. Just like when you go into nature and there's a bear, you don't just go there. And you hear these ridiculous stories where, people just want to put their child onto the bear and take a picture, and then they almost got killed. And you just think, well, either that's just the story they tell. It's even possible that they manifested it because of, the way they behaved. But it's just something you don't do. You don't just go and touch someone. And I'm just asking myself, if that ever happens again, what would I do? Do I have to wear shoes just because people are insane? Do I have to wear shoes just because people, are kind of crazy and they just walk right into my space? I mean, it's a miracle that I allowed this to happen. And it's hard for me to sometimes understand the things that happened to me. But I certainly felt like she was trying to like kind of overshadow me, overpower me with her will to give me shoes because she thought that's what I needed. And what is interesting, because we're also talking about the third eye here, of course, and everything you can see with that I did see, I do see like different faces lurking behind other people. And then the question is that just me projecting it onto them? Because the thing is, I have met people that just seem to change shape, like shapeshifters. People who are actually kind of vile. I mean, they have a really disgusting personality, and you meet them, and for some reason you just get drawn in by them. You just feel like, wow, it's like super attractive. I mean, what you perceive is just a distortion of truth. And I'm not sure if that's just in connection with perspectives I have come across from other people that just live in this weird kind of fear where they think everybody's possessed and there's like ghosts everywhere. I mean, I have seen spirits in dreams and it felt like they were right there. Then you can say, yeah, that was just a dream, but I don't think so. I think I was looking at what was happening from a different angle. So I was doing energetic cleansing at somebody's home, and I slept there alone, and I had started to clean everything, and I had this intense dream, and somebody was just walking around in this place, and I just said, leave. And I just sent him out. And if I think about it now, I mean, I do see these kind of waves or wraiths. It's like beings that are kind of empty and that just feed on energy. It's like things that were left behind, or it's hard to say. You see, I'm really struggling. I'm just trying to say what I perceive. I have seen things. Some of my dreams were so clear and lifelike. I never really control my dreams. I just let them happen, and then I try to understand what the teaching is. So what is the NeverNever? It's a place of shadows. And maybe that's the realm of the shaman. Maybe that's the underworld. Right? It's like, it's called the underworld for a reason. And then the question is, maybe this is the underworld. Because I certainly feel like, where do these ideas of Jotunheimen, and all these places in, where Odin lives, and what is it all, Jotunheimen, and then, it's a Midgard, and these kind of places. I mean, where do they come from? I mean, we can act like, these places were just made up, or we just accept that, they could be real. Like, they could be actually real. And maybe it's just me that wants to have a bit more drama in his life. Where I say life is too boring, so I'll just start, spinning my own story so that I have more interesting things to talk about. And if you read, for instance, Philip K. Dick, which is certainly an interesting name, but I mean, how do people come up with these things? Where do ideas come from? So to me, the NeverNever is certainly some kind of other dimension. It's a place I can visit if I close my eyes and I focus on it. And depending on where I am, I may not want to enter it. because I may pick up on different beings or different things, and I just feel like, of course, I mean, anybody who's ever experimented with Amanita muscaria may have such experiences. And I know I used to be really careful with these things because, I mean, one experience can change you for the rest of your life, and you just have to ask yourself if you want that kind of an experience. I mean, do you really want these kinds of experiences? Because once they're there, it's hard to get rid of them. It's like they cling to you and they change, right? It's like that's what people mean when they talk about flashbacks. Suddenly it's just like things are changing, and you know, the only way for me to deal with that is simply by accepting that nothing is set in stone, that everything comes and goes in waves. Everything is a wave. And life is kind of, you know, energy comes in waves, and there's like currents of energy surrounding us. So, no, let the people who want to live in ignorance just live in ignorance, you know, and then they can be harvested by the industry or whatever. But the question is still, why do people smoke tobacco? Why do they drink coffee? You know, where do these desires come from? Why can I not simply say, you know, I'm all right, and then I just, you know, step around the corner and then I'll be all right for the rest of my life? Why does it take practice, you know, to understand things? And what I've certainly realized is that, you know, just if I look at my own life, I sometimes think I don't know, at least I try to express it. Most people, you know, they don't even have time to think about these things. And I do think it's important just for humanity to grow, and maybe sometimes it's important to also demonize certain behaviors, like the way we treat children. I can safely say that, yeah, sure, I know, I'll demonize that if you are condescending towards children, but it's also not the way to just worship them. I mean, if we worship children, we also have to worship adults, and then we have to worship animals, and then we have to worship plants. But where does it leave us humans then, right? Where does it leave us humans? And just because, you know, so many people seem to believe in science because they were just afraid of nature, and so they started to control. So science is a clear sign of fear, right? The fear of not having enough. Science is just a sign of greed. And we are willing to try to kill, you know, the last of whoever lives in the Amazon rainforest or indigenous people, right? I mean, but voices are being heard, right? I mean, we are trying to fight against this. So, first of all, the NeverNever is just a word, and so is the underworld, you know? It's just, but where do games like Mario, Super Mario Brothers come from? I mean, he eats fly agaric, and he dives into tubes, which are portals into other worlds, and then he has to go through them. And that's certainly what I'm experiencing. Like, if I consider myself like in the flesh, I'm always there, I'm always right here, and oh wow, that's another one of these, what is the NeverNever? Nice. So if I'm right here, you know, I can touch myself and I can take a needle, I can pinch myself, it's gonna bleed. But I feel like on the inside, I'm walking a path. You know, I'm like constantly moving through time and space. And sometimes I enter through dimensions, or I pass through dimensions which are scary, and where everything suddenly seems uncertain, and where everything suddenly seems weird. And I'm certainly starting to doubt the book that I started to write because, sometimes, I don't know, I just would like to write a novel. But you see, that's also the thing. There's like clear messages. You have to write the book in the way that you started. And after that, you can maybe write a novel. There are things that I simply cannot choose. I just have to do them. And then you may see it and then you may think, oh wow, that's so nice. But I never really chose this. It just happened to me and I simply reacted to it. And so my creative outlet is just a way for me to deal with all this stuff that I perceive all the time. And then in that sense, I would say, yeah, sure, right? I have no interest to have a real job because this life is just more interesting than to just sit there and be an accountant. How boring is that? But for an accountant, it may be what he likes. And maybe that's just all I do. Maybe I'm just a distraction. But if I just look at how much strength I have in comparison to other people who are as old as I am or appear to be on paper, I certainly have a lot of strength just by, doing this on my own with no guidance and just managing to keep going, whether you like it or not. It's none of my business. But I certainly looked for something to do and I saw that there are more people than me. And to help these people to survive, I simply said, you know what, I'm just going to take all this weirdness and just do something with it. Because this weirdness has helped me, right? Because if I act like the underworld doesn't exist, then I will live a life of imbalance. It helped it. It helped me to be a little bit afraid, to have fear. And it also inspired me to learn about the world that I actually live in. And everyone I meet is just so sure that they know. And the best teaching is, you know that you don't know. And from that place, you can start to learn again. But then you also have to be open to the weirdness of your own existence. And to stop believing all this stuff that we think is the truth, is the earth round or flat, To me, consciousness is always flat. So to me, when I think about it, yeah, the earth is absolutely flat. May make no sense because they say science has proven it, but they prove nothing because I cannot go to where they say the satellites are. That is not open to the public. They just say you're supposed to go there. No, they just say that they have access to space. To me, that's just a big show that they put on to give us the idea that, it's like progress. I don't see that we're progressing anywhere. It's just getting worse. We're just digging a hole because we don't know. We're just getting too heavy and some people have to do the emotional weightlifting. And it's usually the shamans that are very close to madness. And for that, maybe you have to understand something about, tribes to understand what the shaman does, because that's what he does. And if you do that, I had nobody who could, I met some people, but they couldn't really teach me everything. So I just did it on my own in the end. With the help of course, the recordings of people like Terence McKenna and also in parts Ramdas and, Carlos Castaneda. And I just spent time with that and I just learned about myself. from people who were a bit like me. And that's a much better approach than to just assume we're all the same, because we're clearly not. Otherwise, everyone would just be the same and just want the same thing, but we do not. Anyway, it has strengthened me to deal with these things and to just understand what fear is. And so the NeverNever, I would say, is just the place where all your fear is. So you could even call that your root chakra, you know, and then where everybody tries to be in all the time, in this place of bliss and party, you know, that's then maybe the crown chakra. Yeah, I'm not sure where people are actually. I just know I'm trying to be in the center. So yeah, I perceive both worlds. It's just the challenge to perceive them at all times. To always, you know, I basically lead a relative life. If I say, you know, something's bad, I immediately perceive that I said it, and then I try to twist it around into, you know, what's bad, right? So if everything's relative, you know, people who think everything is set in stone, they have a problem to deal with such a perspective, because you can never pin me down, so they never know who they're actually talking to. Yeah, so in the end, what is the NeverNever? I just wrote a poem. May it enlighten you. Actually, I may keep that for tomorrow.